I want to give you a little bit of background on where my career was. And I was Japanese gardening, quote unquote Japanese. You can decide whether it's truly Japanese or not. But I was working in design build. You can see on the photograph here, I was working on some interesting, unique, and exciting projects. And I was just starting to work with stone and dabble in Japanese style garden building. When I was introduced to NAJGA through the firm that I was working for, and I really had the opportunity to open up my mind and see how I could further not just my career, but my personal life. And I have David's name on the screen there, David Slauson, because, well, for a number of reasons, but one, to honor him, but because he really did inspire me and push me into going further, and he probably doesn't even know how much. So just wanted to mention that there as a side note. Okay, so, something happened. Oh, excuse me, something happened to my screen. Okay, I guess we're just gonna move on to this screen and the presentation. So after going to NAJGA, I met the aesthetic pruners. And from the moment that I met them, and Grant was the first person that I met, and from the moment of meeting them, it was a very strong connection, not only to what it was that they were doing professionally, but personally, I felt that it was a place of home, or a place where there were kindred spirits for me. So I knew that this was something that I wanted to do more professionally, to fulfill what was only just beginning in my career. And so I was so inspired that I started writing articles in state magazines. And I started, every chance that I would get where I was working at the firm, I would slip away from doing other tasks to prune on plant material on job sites where I was working. So you can see that I had a large impact on me. And in doing that, I realized what my capability was, and that because I had a background in pruning while I was going to school, I trained under an English trained gardener, and he had a very natural style. And from that, I had a really good foundation in pruning already. Then meeting the aesthetic pruners, I realized that my capacity for going further and deeper was much greater. So I really started to look at my career path and what I wanted, and how that was going to affect the whole essence of who I was. And as you can see in the photographs here, we've got some influential pruners in my life. So what made me decide that becoming a certified aesthetic pruner was going to be the next move I wanted to take in my career that was going to sustain my career? So on the personal side, I had, of course, there was the fact that I could learn more and refine my techniques. It was going to really help with, I have a family, and at the time my children were younger, and I saw that it was going to really help me have the work-life balance that I wanted. And I knew that I could influence more people in my local area to understand the garden context and design, and how pruning and sustaining the space in which you live, and how that all comes together, not just as building gardens. So I was really interested in that personally. Professionally, it gave me then the opportunity to start my own business, because it was a low cost item that I could add to my repertoire. It was going to show stability in having a new business. And that's really important when you're starting out new, especially if there are a lot of people doing something similar to what you do, say the different gardening, design, installation services, I knew that it would set me apart and I would get noticed for that. And then the last thing was I was really excited about what aesthetic pruning was. And so it excited me professionally to become a part of that larger group and network, and the theology that goes beyond my own views, but it was a shared conscious effort between many people. So those are some reasons why you might want to do that in your career. And basically at the time, the certification process was extremely frustrating for me. And the reason is because I live in Michigan. As you can see on my maps here, I've got arrows showing you roughly where I live in Michigan, and you can see on that plant zone, what plant zone region that I'm in. And then if you look at the California map, you can see the Bay Area, which is where most of the aesthetic pruners lived at the time. And everybody had gone there to the Merit College program to then go on to become a certified aesthetic pruner. So it didn't look like the possibility for me to become a certified was going to happen, especially since, as I mentioned before, I had a family that I wasn't willing to sacrifice to move away to do that at that time. But I wasn't going to let it stop me. I wanted to do it. So I kept working and decided that in the meantime, until there was some way for this to work out, I would just keep pruning. So I did start my own business, and I started pruning. And over here on the right-hand side of the screen with the trees, those are pictures of an example of the type of work that I was doing to put into the portfolio for the certification process. And as you can see, it wasn't anything elaborate. It was good pruning, where I was at the time, and what I needed to keep myself moving forward and feeling like I was reaching that goal. The good thing is that this shows how getting certified as a pruner can happen for anybody, no matter what your region. So moving forward, it should not be a reason to stop you in considering to become a certified aesthetic pruner. So if you are interested in it, what I recommend, and you don't know that much about it either, I recommend that you go to the website, our website here, which is the Aesthetic Pruners Association .org, and there are headings there on that page. And under the certification heading, you click on that, and then you will find that exam page, which talks about the CAP exam. And it gives you all the information you need for creating a portfolio, what would be required of you, any potential costs. And you can also then, speak with the pruners about moving forward on that. Or you can turn and speak to somebody who's potentially in the room right now and ask them more on that. All right. So in the certification process for myself, I love this page because it's going to help me to slow down. I know I've been talking fast because I felt like I lost a lot of time there with this technology hiccup. But in the certification, what I went through in my mindset was just as important as what I did for my business and my career development. And it's an interesting balance, and it's really necessary. And I'm really, really glad to be able to share this with all of you. So when I first started pruning, I loved it. It was joyful. I would have done it all day. If I didn't have to go to work and make money, I would have just done this for anybody. And then once I became certified, that joy, it transformed or evolved, and it became more of a pride and an honor. Because again, it wasn't just me taking care of myself and nourishing my own soul, but it was part of the larger network. And I was standing for something that I felt had a lot of value there. So that was a very surprising um, change in my mindset. Another thing that happened after I became certified, which is funny that I think this is a positive thing, but I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I thought, oh my gosh, I am the first person in Michigan to ever be certified and one of two in the country who did not attend the Merit College program. So this was a big deal. It was a really big deal for the APA, and it was a big deal for someone, for myself, being able to do that. So I thought all of a sudden I had to know everything. And I was putting a lot of weight on myself for the first couple years. But slowly, over time, the more things I worked on, the more people I spoke with, the more that I paid attention and I became more conscious of what I was doing every day on every tree and every season and how different all of it was, even though it seemed repetitive, it wasn't. And that all vanished. It drifted away. So my sense for needing to compete with myself dissipated, and I had a profound freedom. So these may not be things that you are expecting or even looking for in getting a certification, but definitely a bonus nonetheless. So basically, to sum it up, as I wrote here on the slide, it gave me a heightened awareness of myself and what I was doing most of the time. Just like right now, I have this sense that I'm going very fast and I can't see my screen very well. So I'm just really hoping that this is coming through clear for all of you. But so then we move back into more of a business aspect, because we've covered, those other points and how becoming certified helps complete, your gardening profession. But so business wise, how did it really stain my career though? And I made a note. I wanted to have the definition of sustain up here on the screen because it's kind of a negative sounding word. And you think of sustaining, at least I did, think of sustaining as just getting me by. And it really means to strengthen or support physically and or mentally. And as I could add to this, I could write emotionally because it did so much for my emotional mindset as well. But okay, I know I'm distracted. So back onto the business side. Becoming certified as an aesthetic pruner, there was a standard for respect once I became certified. So from arborists and landscapers that didn't know what it was in my area, because there's still a lot of educating that I'm doing in the area and bringing it here to Michigan. Because I had that word certification in front of aesthetic pruning now, they could respect it, even though they didn't quite understand it or it wasn't really heard of. So that was extremely beneficial business related. It also, in opening my network, it wasn't just opening the great network of the aesthetic pruners, which when you're a certified aesthetic pruner, you do have more access to more opportunities within the group of pruners. But it was, again, with arborists, it extended my network because I wasn't just a designer in their eyes anymore. I became somebody that they could respect with insight. And so I became someone that they valued and they want to speak at their conferences and they want to hear my take on the industry. And so it really opened up that network. It also gave me much more confidence in my rate and what I was charging. What a gardener charges or a designer And depending on, whether people understand the difference in that, or how they can be very much the same thing, but not in every area. There is an expectation of hierarchy of rates. And just claiming that I was an aesthetic pruner didn't give me the value in most people's eyes to be able to charge more to show I had this extra worth, which I always had. But then now I was able to really put that forward with confidence, and people accepted it. So another unexpected thing to aesthetic pruning and becoming certified was that my garden design, my work, is better. So I've noticed an evolution in my design work, the way I look at details, the way that works. Am I over? I can hear you guys a little bit.
We're good. We're good, and we're hearing you. But yeah, we are getting near the end.
Okay, good. This is the last slide anyway, so. Okay. So then, as it says, I had a surgeon work, but not only did I have, oh, my screen just disappeared. Okay. Not only did I have, you guys must be laughing. Oh, and if you're not, you should be. Not only did I have surge in work, I had works of quality, high quality, come my way from being certified. And some examples of those were in the photographs that were on the last screen. That I'm afraid to click back, something else might happen. But examples are pruning at the Frederick Meyer Garden in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that I have done a couple times now, and helping that garden evolve. And working with Cranbrook Centers for Research and helping them with the restoration of their 100-year-old Japanese garden. So if that doesn't make the case, I don't know what will. So I think my time is up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily.
Hello, everyone. And again, thank you, Emily, for breaking the ground on our total digital presentation. It's hard being the first person and all the bugs work out, and anyways, crazy. So I'm going to set my screen up and then I'll start. I'm going to share and then get everything organized for my view. Let's see. I'm going to reduce me. I'm going to set this up to play. Okay, are we all good?
We are good. Thank you.
Excellent. Yay. So for my portion of the presentation, as a three-person panel, we kind of wanted to cover a lot of ground. So I'm going to totally switch gears in a way and talk about kind of some more of the tools in your toolbox for your pruning practice. And I find that quite often in life, small actions build up to make a big difference. And I think this is also the case when it comes to a resilient pruning practice and fostering trees that are resilient in what is pretty much now kind of an ever-changing landscape. And as far as professionally, resiliency and adaptability is a key component of sustaining your career, whether it's as a certified aesthetic pruner or any kind of horticulture industry. So I chose two small things that kind of add up to be a big deal to add resiliency to your pruning practice and can kind of have a big impact. And those two things are the art of a 5-year plan and sustaining resilience with 3 types of pruning kits. And first, before I begin with these two topics, I wanted to cover this heading, pruning with design intent. And the aesthetic pruning talks about this a lot, where you're pruning with design intent. But I think when we hear the word design, we often think of the design of a car or a shoe or some kind of object. And even in gardens, the design of a garden seems to be like, oh, this end product. But design, according to this definition I found in the new Oxford American Dictionary, says purpose, planning, or intention that exists or is thought to exist behind an action, fact, or material object. And so when I wrote this definition down, I realized maybe saying design intent is redundant because design includes this intent behind it. And so I'd like you to think of my two topics under this umbrella or within this container of design as I move forward. So I'm going to start with the art of the 5-year plan. And I first heard this from Dennis Makishima, and he often said that you start strong and you end strong, and then you start all over again and do it again. And I think it's interesting, this is the topic I chose to talk about, and then listening to the strategic planning that we talked about this morning at the NAJGA event, it all kind of ties into this concept of taking 5-year chunks of time, because it's really a bite-sized slice of time that you can assess your progress or setbacks while making adjustments as you go. Like, that's kind of the beauty of it, is you don't have to follow it to the letter. You can use this time span to evolve and adapt and change, which, is kind of, required for sustainability and resilience. It gives you a chance to, like I said, assess, and taking photographs or getting feedback from clients, people, anybody involved is really helpful for that. And again, this morning, getting feedback from more people really helps to add layers to your information. And I really do think within this process, you can adapt to changes by this continual assessment, whether it's changes to yourself, to the context, dealing with changes in climate, all of those things that are kind of thrown our way. So I chose this tree, it's a Pinus monticola Crawford, as my example of a 5-year pruning plan, just to kind of be more specific. And this natural growth shape of this cultivar is kind of a globular form. And this tree's in Petaluma, and it's kind of at the entrance of this arbor to the patio. And from the client's perspective, it really was starting to get too kind of massive and imposing and started to overshadow the welcomeness of this entrance. And so we had two options. One was to completely remove the tree or to see what we could do with it. So there was kind of a freeing moment there. So we saw what we could do with it, and we changed it from a multi-trunk globular form and made it more conical and just really completely entirely changed the structure. You could say we started strong on this 5-year plan. Not always recommended, right? This is pretty harsh on the tree, and for the next 2 years, it was really weak and it coned profusely, and we had to remove the attempt to save energy as much as possible. And this is 2 years later, so you can see it's taken a long time for it to get kind of new flush of growth back on it, but it's alive, it's still going, it's starting to pick up. This is the middle of that 5-year plan where there's a lot of assessments and adjustments and watching. In 2018, you can see it's pretty much recovered its vigor. It's filling in nicely. All of a sudden, there's going to be a lot more options going forward. And this is towards the end of that 5-year plan. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get back to continue work on this tree. But my client sent me a picture now of 2021. And I think some work has been done, but not a lot. And you can see it's starting to move back almost into that globular form, like it's starting to round out again. It still has that columnar shape, but it is kind of returning to that sun-loving profile of everything getting sun. So now the next 5 years isn't going to be the same as the first 5 years. The next 5 years, we can really focus on doing more detailed work and refinement, and kind of spend these next 5 years in a different phase, which is pretty fun. 5-year plan is really this micro bite of time compared to a bigger long-term plan. This is an example of two totally different 5-year plans for the same species of tree. So it just goes to show that the 5-year plan needs to adjust based on species and really based on context. The tree on the left is more of a street tree, and it's kind of doing its big, beautiful growth habit, and we keep it a little more open and free and keep the suckers out and try to maintain some balance. so it doesn't get heavy and tip off the hillside. But the Arbutus marina on the right is along a riverfront, and so it's kind of in this view corridor looking from the garden out towards the river. So its 5-year plan is way more involved, takes way more multiple prunings a year, and the idea is to keep it small in scale so we can see over it, but also keep it somewhat natural looking and utilize the form that it's got in the shape. So same species, 2 totally different 5-year plans. And now I'm going to move on to the 3 types of pruning cuts for pruning with design intent. And I chose this as my topic, even though, you know, it feels like we should all know good cuts, good horticulture cuts, healthy for the tree, just a basic fundamental skill. But I think if you really dial down your fundamental skills so that they're almost just intuitive, then that's when you can be really adaptable to changing circumstances. And so that's kind of why I chose these topics to talk about. Within the 3 pruning cuts, you know, we are kind of assuming that this is all about removal, like what are you taking away? But in reality, it's all about what's left behind, because that's what we see. We don't see what we take away. And so really you're finding the best to leave. And one way to find out what to cut is if you find the best, it's the best branch for the future, because you have this 5-year plan. So you're not going to leave something that doesn't really help you out within your plan. And I think if making choices for the future, it kind of adds to this ability to be adaptable and resilient, because you can make changes on the fly. And the more options you have when you have these 3 types of cuts and understand what their reaction is, then you have more chance to respond for the tree. So, you know, a heading or tipping or cut, sometimes if it's not in balance, you can be too much and it can get too thick and it can lead to kind of a mess of reactive growth inside. Removal cut at the point of origin, which in the past we always called a thinning cut, that's the new term, but I'll probably still call it a thinning cut. You can thin something up way too much and be left with these wispy shoots at the top that are out of balance and you know, too big. And in a reduction cut, you can, if you're ignoring this rule of a third, you're going to lose your natural taper and you're going to lose a natural transition and end up with bulky profiles. So keeping all of these things in balance is a key technique. And if you can revisit these things, these fundamental skills, I think it can help push you through any creative blocks, technical stumbling blocks. Going back to those fundamentals can kind of reboot the process for you. So I'm going to run through the 3 cuts real quick. This is, you know, the heading or tipping, which is you cut at a leaf node. And this really disrupts that strong auxin and apical dominance of the end of each branches and really redirects kind of this growing chemical process in the plant. And sometimes it can cause really reactive growth at the end. Sometimes it can stimulate new buds to grow underneath. Sometimes it's just a way of removing foliage at the top and lets more sunlight inside. It's used quite often to maintain profiles of trees. This is that same Arbutus marina along the river. And this is the first pruning in 2018 on the left. And you can see some work had been done on it and it's super reactive to that growth. And so the first goal was to do thinning and reduction, even though I maintained some kind of profile, was all thinning and reduction cuts. But going forward 2 years later, with the development of the tree, it's kind of moved into this balance, going back to balance of some thinning and reduction cuts, but also now heading cuts. So I think it's tempting for us to also start with these heading cuts at the beginning, but quite often they come towards the end or middle of your 5-year plan when you've kind of gotten to know the tree and its reactive growth. And it's, you know, how it's this give and take of removal and grow back. Sometimes the heading cuts don't happen until later. Are we still okay? Ah, man, okay. Removal and thinning, the one I use the most. It's just the plant's reaction is just so predictable. And that's one of the valuable things of this of this type of cut because of the way it handles this type of removal. And this is an example of, you know, a super overgrown juniper. And really, I can bring those profiles back with reduction and thinning only. Again, maybe in the future I'll use more heading cuts, but it's not necessary here. And then a reduction cut where you take that big, thick, usually most dominant end of the branch and remove it. And that really can quite often lighten up your profile. This would be an example of a pine tree that I didn't get to the candling for. I'm gonna move through real fast. This is all reduction cuts. There's not a single candle removal or heading cut, reduction and thinning. And you can see the impact of what that one cut can make over multiple 5 cuts. And you can do it have the same impact with just one reduction cut. I'm just going to cruise through this maple because I think it's fascinating that it's a 2-foot wide maple, but from one view it looks really big. And this will be super key for me to use reduction cuts and heading cuts to maintain this profile as a tool in my toolbox. I'm super going through it, but if you have questions at the end, we can answer these questions. And I use releader as almost a subcut of a reduction cut because a releader is you're really picking one branch that you want to be the top, like the tree will pick for itself, or you can pick it if you have a specific agenda for it. And so that kind of adds another layer to this reduction cut, and you yourself are establishing a new leader. This is a more mechanical version of it, where I actually took a leader and tied it up to make that reduction and to kind of keep that profile intact with that conical dominant tip, but regaining some reduction at the same time. Okay, and then I'll end with tell about it. And I like this quote from Mary Oliver, instructions for living a life, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. And I think you could put pruning in there, instructions for your pruning practice, and follow all of those things. And I think our presentations today kind of embody this quote, where if we pay attention and we're amazed by what we find, and then that final part, which NAJGA does so well, is it really enables us to tell about it and to share it and to learn from everyone else. Okay, so I think that's it for me. Thank you. And hopefully we do have more time.
Thank you, Maryann.
So cultivating work spirit, a fancy way for me to talk about how do I stay interested in what I'm doing? How do I engage with my work in a way that brings me enjoyment and ongoing fulfillment, not just a temporary thing. So unfortunately, sometimes in life we can, end up in places that, or moods that just aren't quite where we want to be, like this traffic jam. And this was an interesting experience for me. I think a lot of what I'm presenting today are little nuggets that I've learned along the way, and they're by no means inclusive to this topic. And I really look forward to your input during the Q&A time. But I was kind of riding a bummer, stuck here for what turned to be like about an hour here in the Bay Area, this section of freeway known as the Maze. And all of a sudden I got a little inspiration to pull out my phone and start taking pictures. And just that little shift made me realize like the light's really kind of nice today. And I just was taking pictures of the cars next to me, the people in them, the views around. It just shifted my attitude. I was still stuck in traffic, but all of a sudden it was not such a bad thing. So in terms of my work life, there are definitely times when I feel like I'm trudging through my work days and my work weeks. And just reminding myself to shift perspective is a big, big help. I want to encourage us to think of work as a path, as a journey, as a vocation. My work is not just a way to make money, it's a way for me to go through life and to orient myself towards life. And what I'm learning at work also applies to my personal life. the lessons I learn in the garden, I can take with me to be a better person, for my friends and family, for myself. So that's a really kind of a big shift in perspective, to think of work as not just, work, but as an opportunity to live life and go through life. And one of the things that Michael Allagher shared with me in talking about gardening was that we're just part of a long chain of gardeners. And, that goes back hundreds, thousands of years, maybe, of people that have dedicated our lives to working in the garden and bringing nature into these more private spaces. And that's a kind of cool thing to connect with. And that there's people coming after us too. So we're just part of this continuum, part of this path. So as a result of it being a vacation, I really want to lean into my learning. I have a hunger to know more, to be better, to find the next thing out, to just what's that next step in my journey on the path. And along the way, I can pass that on as well. And that's kind of its own reward in a lot of ways, and can come back around in really surprising ways. Just to explain this picture, this is one of our APA gatherings, and that's Randall Lee in the middle, amused at our tag team pruning demonstration, where we had 2 teams of 2 people, each taking turns making a cut on the tree while their partner had their back turned. So they weren't quite sure what they were doing. And it was just a fun way of doing this. Another year we did this with people blindfolded and just pruning trees blindfolded and seeing the result. So, just as a side note, all these pictures of the Japanese garden are in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park, at the Japanese garden there where I worked for a while. And a quote from Dennis Makashima, who so many of us were fortunate to study with, including Maryann and Emily. And unfortunately, he never writes much down, but there's a lot of verbal, oral tradition in our teaching. And he said this, kind of what I think of as a ladder of gardening awareness, of pruning awareness. Like the first step is to know the garden or the tree. And then as we go down, our level of impact on the garden goes up because we understand more. And ending with this idea that nature is the ultimate. And years later, I was reading this book by a bonsai artist, Robert Stevens, who's all the way across the world in Indonesia. And he kind of said pretty much the same thing. And both these men are self-taught and came back to this place of nature is kind of the ultimate teacher. And that's something that, as I'm working day to day, it really helps me to remember that I'm just a student of nature. And yeah. And that idea that I'm not just a student of nature, I am nature. I am natural. There's nothing different in terms of me and the garden. We're part of the same natural world. And we tend to forget that in our modernized society, unfortunately. So part of my purpose in doing what I do is to help people connect with nature. That's an underlying goal I have for my work, is I want people to be a little more connected with nature when I'm done working for them. And along the way, it's nice to just enjoy the enjoyable parts of our work. and one of which is we have access to gardens or parts of a garden that a lot of people don't. So it's really nice to be aware of that, take it in, and take advantage of it. When I worked at the tea garden in Golden Gate Park, it was like I loved going off the path to get different views of the garden that people shouldn't get if they were staying on the path. But yeah, and some of those views were really spectacular. This amazing trunk on this pine tree being one of them. And also we have access to moments that other people may not have, including the quiet in the early morning, before visitors arrive, before the waterfalls turned on, when things are still and quiet, just to take the time to appreciate that. You know, a lot of times try to hit the ground running and get done what needs to get done today, but just to stop for a few moments and like, wow, it's really nice right now, and just take that in. And then that little bit of letting that in can feed me and sustain me through the day. Thanks. I want to cherish my colleagues and clients. This is a coworker at the Japanese garden there, Deb Knox. What a wonderful spirit to be around day in and day out. And I learned so much about gardening from her, but also just about how to be a happy person. Embracing effort, like sometimes work is work and it's hard, and that's okay. And it can feel good to get all hot and sweaty and out of breath, and just kind of that kind of groundedness, and that like my body's working, and that's just enjoy it, you know, if I can, rather than, oh, it's so hot and I'm so bothered. This is a project at Green Gulch Zen Center in Marin County that Bill Castellan led, and this is his equipment. And we moved these 3 black pine trees from a tea garden out to this other spot that that was decided would be a good place for these trees. And Bill created this amazing composition with these 3 pine trees. This is the last tree to go in. And when we were all done, it was time to water the trees in what a colleague of mine, Ramon, used to call the blessing, which is a neat framing for, you know, letting the tree know it has a new home and a new life ahead of it. And we're gonna, you know, give it a little blessing as it starts its new journey. But I tend to be real like, okay, time to pack up and get out of here. I'm all done. And after we were done watering, I noticed that Bill was just standing about 20 feet back, looking at these trees with a grin on his face, and stayed there for about 5 minutes, just appreciating the results of the hard work and the effort, and just taking it in. Once again, letting it in. And those moments of allowing stuff in can really sustain me. So it was a big lesson for me to learn. Another day I was working with Yuki Nara at a client of hers, and she was helping me learn maple pruning. She got me started working. I was up on my ladder working away, and I turned over and looked at her, and she was laying on her back horizontal, about 8 feet off the ground, nestled in this crux of branches in the maple tree. And I could just feel her ease and her connectedness to the tree. And it was another one of those light bulb moments where I just like, oh, I need to take, you know, when these moments, when they show up, just appreciate them. And I'm here to enjoy the garden as well as work in it. Looking for inspiration is always a help. You know, whether it's another garden out in nature, some publication, picture book, any other experience we have that just, you know, kind of jazzes us. I chose this slide because this is just north of you, about an hour and 15 minutes in Costa Mesa, California. north of San Diego. It's an abstract expression of what different California landscapes look like. And I encourage you to look into that further. And then this idea of aspiration, that it's really a good thing to have an underlying goal, to really have something that I'm working for other than just trying to, do what's there in my physical to-do list today, to have, I want to learn more about nature. I want to be more connected to nature. I want to share that with other people, those kinds of aspirations. I want to be, blank, fill in the blank, and just have a little bit of awareness about that aspiration. And that leads me to this idea. There's 3 keys to happiness. These people did this documentary, Happy, which is really worth watching, but it went all around the world, all types of different people. And the happy people had 3 things in common: that they didn't have to worry about food, shelter, clothing. That's their kind of baseline level of living was taken care of. Beyond that, money didn't really contribute to happiness. That family and friends were really important, and that there was something that connected them to life beyond themselves, whether it was a spiritual thing or something with the community, volunteer work, some way of like getting out of themselves. And those 3 things were key to happiness. And as I get this, it's like I can get all of those needs met through my work. So that's something to ponder. And then lastly, when I'm really feeling kind of stagnant and uninspired, it can be helpful to look back and say, well, what was it like 3 years ago, and have I improved? Because in the day-to-day, there's a lot of incremental change going on that I may not be aware of. But when I step back and look back, I realize I've come some distance on that path. And then it reminds me that there's more path ahead of me. And all of that can really bring my work spirit back up. So I want to leave you with this quote from Shakespeare. And I just came across this, and it's, I just love this idea of daily new and old, that both of those things can be there. And, sometimes my work is a lot the same, but there's also a newness to it. And when I can be in that happy place between those 2 things, I can be happy as well. And that's what I have to share about work spirit. And thanks so much for your time and your attention, and look forward to your comments. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to say I am very humbled to be here. As Ben said, I am basically a volunteer, have been for about 10 or 12 years, and really a student of human behavior, and so I've been fascinated with the effects of Japanese gardens on human well-being, which is why we started this. So what I'm going to do is give a real brief, maybe 15-minute overview of well-being. I think I maybe have a different perspective as a former therapist and a mental health professional. I won't get too technical, but try to give an overview, and then my colleagues online will give some very specific. They have a lot of years of experience in 2 different gardens. Ben will tell you more about them, and they'll give you some more hands-on information about gardens and well-being programs. So let's get started. As a former therapist, I believe the experience, and it's important to remember, the experience of being in a Japanese garden can change lives by fostering well-being and helping others who are in the search for finding meaning. I think there's some certain aspects that I'll go over real briefly, just to give so we have a common language of what is it. Everybody sort of knows what well-being is, but there's some specific things I'll highlight. And then what is it? This is the part that I've been fascinated with for more than a decade. What is it about a Japanese garden, the experience of being in it, that I consider therapeutic and one of the best ways to develop well-being? To get started, well-being is really a cornerstone of mental health, and you can see it integrates and it does a number of things. Most importantly, I think when we think of well-being, we think of it as a subjective experience, and so I want to point out it's more than that. And the reason that's important is you can cultivate it, and these programs that you'll hear more about, aspects of the program can help cultivate well-being. And in some ways, the skills that you use, I like to think of them as like working out at the gym, only it's for the mind. It's the brain gym. So well-being can be cultivated by skills. Resilience, I just want to point out briefly, there's some different aspects when somebody's facing challenges, adversity, or traumatic situations. The key to it is a mental process for positive outcomes, and two aspects of it, that if you can look at the trauma or the adversity as a way towards growth, and you can find meaning in it. We know from our experience that we have a new field that's called post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress. So that's important. As a therapist, I saw some common challenges in those seeking help. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes to highlight some of the challenges, common themes that you'll see oftentimes. And I think you'll notice in these first two themes that I have, they're really relevant to today when you think of the COVID and what we've been through. Many people have lost jobs, lost their role, which essentially is our meaning and purpose in life. And then, of course, the obvious one of the alienation that we've experienced. I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about this in real simple terms because it's relevant to what I'm talking about today. For negative self-talk and beliefs, there's an issue that we talk about in therapy called ruminating thinking. That's a very common way of looking at the world that often leads to problems and underlies a couple of issues. And ruminating thinking is simply going over and over and over again, either looking at things from the past and trying to figure out, make sense of them. And I always say there's three things that people are always asking why questions. Why me? Why always? And why everything? And to get stuck in that kind of thinking is a downward spiral, and actually one of the greatest correlations to depression would be that. The other side of it is, so in one side you're focused on the past, on the other side you're focused on the future in ruminating thinking. And if you're thinking about events in the future and you're asking yourself, what if? What if this happens? For me, what if I come and the microphone, the technology doesn't work? It leads to anxiety. So those are two key things. One of the funny visuals I like to think of in looking at the audience, some of you are familiar with vinyl records. And ruminating thinking, the best way to describe it is a mental process that's like skips on a vinyl record. You can't get out of that groove. You're just stuck. So another challenge is distractibility, and ruminating thinking can cause that, but it's basically demands on our attention. It can be emotional upsets, can be caused by other things, but distractibility. So the important thing about all this is in these problem areas, the key is the person's attention is either focused on the past, as I said, the future, or distracted from the present. And when those issues happen, I won't read these, but that loss of focus on the present moment results in these kinds of things, common things. So let me take the flip side, and you'll notice some overlap or correlation between those. And when I looked at well-being, we have a new field in the mental health field called neuroscience, the research of the brain. And the brain research is fascinating, and they're starting to give us answers for things. And so I have a couple of, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, there's a Center for Healthy Minds that's come out with a framework for well-being. And so I want to share with you just a few things that they came up with. And the first of the 4 pillars, they call them, of a healthy mind is attention and awareness. And it's attention to the present moment, again, coupled with a self-awareness, the ability to recognize within yourself certain sensations, thoughts, feelings in the present moment. And by doing this, you can see it counteracts the ruminating thinking and a host of other things. And really, attentiveness and self-awareness is the key, and those are skills to the other 3 pillars of a healthy mind. Insight, and again, I'm just going to let you look at them briefly. Having insight, making connections, and purpose, finding purpose. Just one comment on purpose. Purpose has been shown to be particularly useful in those dealing with adversity and finding meaning. To find some meaning as a motivation, it also allows you to see the adverse event as a positive thing in your life. Again, a post-traumatic growth. I want to say a little bit about restorative environments. I've heard a lot has been said and written about Japanese gardens as restorative environments, restoring the attention, calming the mind, and that's really true. I don't need to tell you, any of you that are all aware of that. But I think as a therapist that the value in Japanese gardens in terms of well-being goes beyond that and is a therapeutic experience. And it's therapeutic is essentially a healing space, another word for it. People sometimes get a little concerned and they go, oh, I don't like the idea of you using the term therapeutic. Is it like therapy? No, therapeutic is just a healing opportunity for someone. That it does the same thing. It has to have the elements of a restorative experience where it calms the mind, focuses the attention, but it goes beyond that. And it encourages, like we do in therapy, a reflection. So there needs to be a reflective aspect to a therapeutic experience, as well as that new perspectives. Through that reflective sense, we can develop new perspectives by stepping back and having a different view and gaining insights into the issues that we're dealing with. So why are Japanese gardens such great places for fostering well-being? I don't think I have to talk much about that because I think that you all realize the capacity they have because of the design and the features and the elements of a garden that focus the attention on the elements. I also hear people talk about the restorative aspects of nature in a Japanese garden, and that's true, but I don't want to forget, especially as a gardener, the value of the work that goes into the design and the features and the maintenance of the elements. It's the essence of a natural experience. It's the textures. It's the perspective. It's the subtle shapes. This term fractional patterning is just a fancy term from neuroscience. They've proven that when our mind is a pattern-seeking machine, okay? So our mind is set up to be concerned about input, sensory input, should I be aware of or worried about so I can take an action. So our mind is always alert looking for these issues. And when it reaches in a place where there's a pattern that it can recognize, it stills the mind and calms the mind. A very simple explanation I have, if you think about going to a new place for the first time, and you think about how long it seems to get there, but then when you come back from that place to home, it seems much faster. That's an example of patterning where the mind is calmed and stilled. Another really important aspect is the principle of Ma, and which encourages a sense of pause and reflection. I can think of no better example of that. I had the opportunity to visit gardens on a tour of Kyoto, 30 gardens, and to go into a dry Zen temple garden. I can think of no more better example for me of the principle of Ma, where in those settings, the simplicity of them and their sense of removing mental distractions and things in the environment draws you right in. And in that sense of being drawn in, it encourages you to have a sense of imagination and automatically a feeling of reflection, and thus could be the opportunity for new possibilities and new insights. I have, just to kind of wrap, I have two ideas that I'd like to share with those people that are running programs, facilitating programs. And the first one is, it's very important to, from my perspective, to teach skills so that you're generalizing an experience. If a person comes in and I use my therapy experience, they come in and they get these insights and they feel better and they find change in their life and they go home and the same thing. They go back to the old patterns. What we try to do is teach skills so that, no, you can do this at home. So I think our programs need to do this. And so I'd suggest the use of a skill-based attention skill called open monitoring. Most of us are familiar with mindfulness. And mindfulness is a mental focus on the breath. And that's well and good and useful, but for my mind in a Japanese garden where we're in such a rich sensory environment, we want to do two things. We want to actually be focused on the unfocused. We want to be focused on where the attention takes us. And secondly, we want to notice physical inputs, how we respond to them, back to that self-awareness. So by doing so, we're teaching a self-awareness in the environment, in the immediate environment. So I think it's quite a useful skill. Secondly, I think of the the journals, and it occurs to me that using some of the underlying aesthetic values from Zen and Japanese culture, which by no means am I an expert in, but to me, it occurs that it could be useful, especially in the journal, asking reflective questions, because it gives us an understanding of a culture that many of us are not familiar with. So it's an educational aspect, and hopefully it may provide, I think, a different perspective on the Eastern perspective on time and change, for sure. So I think that's valuable. Just to wrap up here, I really believe that more so than ever, because of COVID, gardens can serve a role for helping with healing and well-being, instilling that in individuals that have been affected by COVID-19. And I do know that I think for Jeanne and Pat's program, there are programs of well-being that are focusing on healthcare providers to come into the programs. And lastly, I'll leave you with this quote. It's about the experience. While the garden is just another moment, if experienced deeply, we'll never be the same, for we've been transformed and cultivated by the insights of the garden. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for the introduction. It's kind of weird to hear your voice in San Diego instead of on the grounds of the Japanese garden. But I appreciate the introduction. And I also would really like to acknowledge the fact that Bob was the impetus to this presentation. He called me randomly after a search for well-being programs and suggested that we do a presentation for the NAJGA conference. And I am so glad that he offered us that opportunity. I'm going to share with you the journey to well-being, which you should have up on the screen now. The journey to well-being at the Missouri Botanical Garden. The journey was created over the course of a year and implemented in the fall of 2018 for the first time. The program was very much inspired by the work of the Murakami Garden and their Stroll for Wellbeing, as well as the program at Blodell Nature Reserve, which I had the opportunity to visit. As I review the journey, you will be able to see numerous differences as well as similarities between the stroll and the journey. We are eternally grateful for the work of Murakami as it sent us down a path that we in therapeutic horticulture had not previously considered. When we started this program, we determined early on that we needed to involve other people besides the therapeutic horticulture team. We created focus groups including consumers, members of the medical community that we partner with in our work, a writing professor from a local university, and most importantly, Greg Cadis. He was the supervisor of horticulture for the Japanese garden, and his insight and relationship with that garden provided a perspective which lives on in the program. And we wish him well in his retirement. If you could advance the slide, please. Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So as you listen to Bob and his presentation, there was some reference to the 4 pillars of a healthy mind. As he explained to us in our planning meeting, I was struck by the correlation to therapeutic horticulture. The work that we do is all connected to these 4 pillars: attention and awareness, connections, insight, and purpose. If you could advance to the next one, thank you. Thank you. All of the programs that therapeutic horticulture provides through the Missouri Botanical Garden, both in the setting of the garden as well as in the community, address these areas. So we talk a lot in our work about utilizing senses Sensory exploration is very much a part of every activity that we do. In the Japanese garden, we're given the opportunity to really consider the visual aspects, both close up and from afar. And in the course of the journey, what we want for people is to take that attention and awareness and have that deepen their connection to the landscape and to the place. It also provides people with an opportunity to develop some insight into the concepts of a Japanese garden and what those concepts mean in everyday life and how they can be applied to this practice during the journey. If you could go to the next slide. Okay, the Therapeutic Horticulture team at the Missouri Botanical Garden provides programming in a number of settings, as I mentioned, with a lot of populations. But the commonality is always finding methods to connect people with nature. When the journey was developed, our thought was, what is a better way to achieve that connection than through the wonder of the Japanese garden? Next, please. The Journey program in its original format was a 10-week program, very much like Murakami. The idea was that people would come for an initial meeting, which included an introduction to the Japanese garden, as well as a mid-session meeting and a final meeting. Each of these meetings had a distinct purpose. The initial meeting was to introduce people to the program, but also give them an opportunity to have a tour of the Japanese garden that changes their perspective. When you ask visitors to the Missouri Botanical Garden what their favorite place is, most people will tell you the Japanese garden. But the journey allows them to have an exposure to that space that is very different than what they typically experience on a day-to-day basis. So the tour is a very much an important part of that initial meeting. The mid-session meeting is designed to give people an opportunity to share their experience and also for us to do some instruction in how to enhance that experience. For instance, doing drawing exercises, writing exercises, and but more importantly, that sharing of what people have experienced. The guidebook, again, very similar to Murakami's, is designed around 7 natural elements. And if you could go to the next slide, please. The Murakami program and the Blodell program are, each walk is centered around what I say emotion or some kind of a human aspect. We decided that to deepen the connection with nature, we wanted our program to emphasize natural elements. So we identified 7 natural elements that are common in Japanese gardens, and each walk is centered around one of those elements. The guidebook instructs the person to follow the path, and there are 7 pauses for each walk, and at each pause is an opportunity to explore some information that's in the guidebook, as well as to journal or sketch or whatever, however people want to mark that moment. So there's space in the guidebook to provide that opportunity. The 7 walks are planned so that there are identified pauses, and very often people will go to the same place in multiple walks, but with a different perspective. So you might be on the drum bridge exploring tranquil water, or you might be exploring the sky, because we wanted to give people the idea that your perspective is what matters. And when you have a different perspective and are paying attention to something different, your experience is going to be different. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've jumped ahead to testimonials, but I'm going to talk some more first. When people come to the garden for the Journey program, what I have learned over the course of the experience is that everybody marks this experience differently. In the beginning, we were very much about how to record your experience and journaling in the book and utilizing the space on the pages. I realized very quickly that not everybody wanted to do that. And very often what people will say is, the book is too pretty, I don't want to write in it. So people will use their own journals, or they'll take pictures. Probably the ultimate experience that I had with somebody marking the moment was a person who was a fiber artist. She created a weaving for each of the walks that she mounted then in her book. So again, the program is very individualized, and people experience it differently, record it differently, mark it differently, but always based around those natural elements and what those mean to them over the course of these 10 weeks. One of the adaptations that we've made to the program over the course of the 3 years, first of all, we created what we call a basic journey. So rather than the whole 10-week program and those additional meetings, somebody can come and just do the initial meeting, get the guidebook and do the tour, and then they're finished with meeting with us. They're on their own to have the experience. The other adaptation that we have made through a grant from the Bear Fund was to offer this program at no cost to anyone impacted by cancer. And that grant was made possible through an individual that was involved in the formation of this program, who also happened to work for the Bear Fund and was able to make that connection and help us provide this program for people impacted by cancer. Initially, the idea was that we would be offering the program for people who either were being under treatment for cancer, cancer survivor, or caregivers, like family members. What we learned during COVID was that people that were in that position were not willing to or able to come to the garden and be in that setting. But we realized the impact that things were having on healthcare workers. So we started offering the program to healthcare workers at no cost. In addition, over the course of the pandemic, we were contacted by some staff from one of the larger hospitals in St. Louis, asking us to provide some kind of a program for staff. Of course, we wanted everybody to come to the garden and have the experience, but that wasn't practical. So we developed a virtual experience. And I'm going to attempt in a few minutes to share that, a little snippet of that experience with you. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was what Bob mentioned at the end of his presentation about generalizing skills. So we know that this program is beneficial. We know that people benefit from the experience, but we want them to take those skills that they acquire in the journey and apply them to everyday life. So as a result, we have developed another program called Refresh Through Nature, which is based on the same concept of that connection with nature, but applicable to any setting. And we are offering that program to organizations and employers who are all having struggles with the well-being of their employees. We're hoping that will attendance and that will increase as the months go on. Next slide, please. I think that this quote from a participant speaks to what our intention was for this program. This person was grateful, and we hear that all the time, how grateful people are for the opportunity, and that it opens their eyes to the Japanese garden in a completely different way than what they're used to experiencing. So I think this testimonial kind of speaks to all of those things. We can go on to the next slide. The Saiwa-en is the garden of pure, clear harmony and peace. And at the end of every session of Journey, when we finish our tour, our ending is to indicate to people that what we want is for them to experience this garden and let it provide them with some peace. And I think the voyage or the journey provides them with that. So I like this quote: "The voyage of discovery consists not in seeing new lands, but in seeing with new eyes." We believe that the journey provides those new eyes for participants. So now, if my technology skills work, I'm going to try to share this video with you. All right, let's see. I do struggle with technology, so we shall see. All right. Share my screen. I know it's there. There it is. Share screen. The connotation of powerful is movement, force, change. Yay. Oh, sorry. Sound can be soothing or disconcerting, with the commonality being the power of water. Beyond the image and sound of water, consider the power of water as an essential element of life on Earth. As calming and cleansing as water can be, it is also a commanding force of nature. Water reduces mountains into beaches of sand. It also facilitates the formation of monumental caves and crystals. It is both a force of destruction and fabrication, from which one can draw great humility and inspiration. Water is fluid, soft, and yielding. But water will wear away rock, which is rigid and cannot yield. It is a paradox. What is soft is strong. Lao Tzu. Secret flagstone path. Meandering down this path, you note the progression of the water, cascading from pool to pool. The spot provides an opportunity to be enveloped by the surrounding scene. It is a sensory experience, reminding us to listen, look, allowing ourselves the luxury of deepens our connection to a place in nature. Close your eyes and remember your senses came alive in nature, perhaps in your yard, walking on the beach, reading, savor the memory. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm going to begin by sharing my okay. So I'm very happy to be here today. Where? Oh. Okay, that looks good. Thank you. All right, so today my plan is to talk to you about the Murakami Stroll for Wellbeing. And you've already heard a good deal about it from Jeanne. So you're going to hear another view of it. We've been doing the stroll for about 10 years now, or more than 10 years, beginning with an IMLS grant around 2006. So I'm going to talk about the stroll a little bit. Then I'm going to talk about a study that we did to try to bring the stroll to a broader audience. And then finally, I'm going to link this to the pillars of a healthy mind. Now, let me just ask you, I hear an echo. Are you hearing me clearly? Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, the Stroll for Wellbeing is a program that includes basically 3 components. One of them is garden walk, the 7/8 mile walk around a lake at the Murakami Museum. Group meetings are another component of the Stroll for Wellbeing, and journaling or recording self-reflection is a third part of it. And as Jeanne has mentioned, the group meetings happen for us at the beginning, middle, and the end. They're conducted by a healthcare professional who really focuses on the garden as a resource for well-being. There are 6 pauses in the Murakami Stroll for Wellbeing. And each of those pauses has a symbolism. And this is what we draw on for the movement inspired by Japanese culture. But the wisdom ring symbolism is the circle of life. The straight bridge we talk about. Sometimes when you begin a journey, you can see the end. You just need to get there. The zigzag bridge, third pause. You cannot see the end of that bridge. And this resonates with a lot of our participants. They can't really see where they're going. The gate, passage from one time to another, one place to another. The contemplation pavilions, a place to stop, to sit, to take a breath, to observe before proceeding. And then the waterfall is the last of our 6 pauses. And you just saw a beautiful video about the meaning of water, its flexibility and its ability to wear away solids at the same time, that paradox. So with our 6 pauses are 12 themes. And the first theme is awareness. It's such an important theme that I frequently say to participants that if you just do awareness the whole time you're in this program, you will have done enough. If you can learn awareness, and then you have another year of free membership to practice the other themes. But so this is a list of the themes, and you can see that that some of them are quite positive: freedom, forgiveness, reflection, gratitude, fulfillment. Not everybody can do all of these themes. Sometimes they just can't. I did sessions on Wednesday with a group, and there was one participant who said, I just cannot do joy. I cannot. She had lost her husband. So it's understandable. So awareness you've heard about a lot, I think, in the course of this conference. And it's a really critical part of using the garden as a resource. What we do is we weave the pauses with the themes. So what you see here are pictures of the first 3 pauses: the circle of life, the straight bridge, and the zigzag bridge. And I just gave an example of weaving the pause of awareness through those 3 pauses, weaving the theme of awareness through those 3 pauses. So when at the circle of life, a participant would be asked to notice the unending nature of the circle. Notice the straight path ahead of you with the straight bridge. And with the zigzag bridge, notice that though the path is not straight, it does lead you forward. These are important messages for the population that we work with. In the number of years we've been doing this, we've probably reached well over 2,000 participants. And most of them come to us having suffered some sort of a loss. I'll give some more specifics as I talk about the research about who's participating these days. But people who have been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, people who are caring for a loved one who's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, they've suffered some sort of a loss. They've lost a loved one. So these messages are so important, I think, for the group of people with whom we work. So we've been doing it for a long time, as I said. So in doing it for this period of time, we were facing the problem of sometimes with the people who were coming to the Stroll for Wellbeing couldn't get there as often as we wanted. So we asked them to come twice a week, and they couldn't make it twice a week. So because of distance or their disability. And so we wanted to create a bit more flexibility that perhaps they could come once a week and do another time in their own home or in another garden, some natural environment that could provide comfort for them. So the purpose of the study originally was to describe cross-sectional data using an action research perspective to evaluate nature engagement through culturally inspired movement. We thought that if we could actually teach them some bodily moves to do at home, that perhaps the moves could take them back to that pause in the garden. That was the intention that set us off. So we used Stringer, and although I should have made note of him, I have his book here. Yes, Ernest Stringer's look, think, and act approach to research. It's a community-based participatory or action research approach, and basically it's about like going, in this case, to our participants as experts to guide us regarding what worked for them, what didn't, how we should move forward to study the movement addition to the stroll to see whether indeed it mattered to add the movement. So this is what we started out doing. And just so you know what the movements were, the wisdom ring, circle of life, the movement. I should say that the person who works with us on the stroll, she is our coordinator, Vanessa Rosin, and she's a dancer. Her background is dance. And so she brings a very special movement piece to what we're doing here. And so the circle of life was actually doing a circle, much as you would do an Enzo circle with a brush. Okay, the straight bridge, mindful walking, just paying attention to your steps. The zigzag bridge was a spiral rotation. The gate, opening and lengthening, opening the gate and also lengthening as you would on the other side of that gate is bamboo. And so we use that as part of the movement. The contemplation pavilion, again, is about stopping, about sitting, about taking a breath, observing before moving on. And then the falls, which is the last stop, is a washing meditation. But we had movement associated with it. Reach up tall with both arms, slowly lower your arms forward, bending, etc. So this was the original plan. However, when we did the focus groups after taking our participants through these movements on our original sort of pilot study, they identified these 3 as the ones that really mattered to them. And if you just take a look at their words, the deep breathing that goes along with the movements is extremely valuable for anyone with stress in their lives, whatever the reason is. That's one of the most valuable things. So they endorsed focused breathing and the body scan. And then I think the circles were very relaxing. Circle of life, Enzo circles are what we used. And then some of the movements were very helpful, including the stretching, the posture, because these are things I have to consciously do every day so that I'm not in pain, so that I can walk. So that's very personal. So the bamboo stretch. So these three held up in our preliminary work, suggesting how we should move forward with studying the movement edition of the stroll. And then we looked at all four of these measures in our original work. The personal growth initiative scale, which we had used in other studies and had found to show significant changes relative to strolling through the garden. The promise emotional distress short form, quality of life, which probably many of you know, the SF-36, and then a perceived stress scale. It's a 10-item measure. The participants said to us, the questionnaires were too invasive, and I particularly, let me see, the one that they were most critical of was the emotional distress scale, and it's very it has only 9 or 10 items, but the items are like I'm very depressed. They were annoyed by that. They felt like it didn't touch on what they were there to do. And the SF-36, and like the personal growth initiative, they didn't see that those were directly related. So what they were interested in continuing with was the perceived stress scale, because they believed that what was happening for them is that their stress levels were decreasing. So we went with that. That was the plan. So the plan for the ACT phase of Think, Look, Act were to do 3 movements: the circle of life or Enzo, focused breathing and the body scan, and bamboo stretching with 1 measure, stress. And then along came COVID. And the 3 group meetings went virtual with 1 Japanese inspired cultural movement, focused breathing, body scan, focused breathing and body scan, or Enzo or bamboo stretch included in each. For instance, the group that I had on Wednesday, it was their 2nd session. So we did the Enzo on that session. The 3rd session, we'll do the bamboo stretch with them at the end of the session. So when we finish the session, and it's much as Jeanne explained, during the 2nd session, we talk to people about what they've learned so far. It's midway through the program, and where they're going to take it from here. And when they hear each other talk about things, it inspires others. They inspire each other to continue moving forward and trying some different things in the garden. So the last session, we will do the bamboo stretch as our movement. Now, we haven't been able to formally evaluate. I'm an emeritus professor at Florida Atlantic University, and during COVID, all research, essentially, any contact research stopped. So, but we still have data. And so who were our pandemic participants? Now remember, these are all virtual. That 13% were more common members before they began participating in the Stroll for Wellbeing. 77% were from Palm Beach County, which is where we're located. Most of them were female, and 1/3 were healthcare providers. As Jeanne mentioned, one of the things we did during the COVID pandemic was make a special effort to invite healthcare providers, because there's such a need for them to find resources to calm themselves and to be able to be present with their patients. So yes, so we worked hard at that. Vanessa Rosen worked hard at that, and we did indeed reach some of them. Now, this question so we did evaluations, systematic evaluations, to figure out, like, based on what we were doing new as far as adding the movement, we evaluated what they thought about it, what they thought about the virtual approach as opposed to face-to-face. And basically here, 1/3 heard about, this was just about how did they hear about the program. 1/3 of them heard word of mouth, and 1/4, nearly 1/4 direct referral. So the majority of them, and some of them heard from the internet, including the More Call Me website. So about 70% or so had heard in those 3 ways. So the majority come from direct referral, word of mouth, and from websites or internet supports. And then by age, I thought this was interesting. 47% were 55 years and older. That kind of surprised me, because it meant that it meant that there was quite a large percentage that were under 55. None under 25, but still we were reaching. And I think a lot of that was related to the fact that we had a lot of healthcare providers in this group. And so they tended to be a younger group who were making time, sometimes would come to the sessions. We had one home health nurse who would come to our meeting sessions in his car. He would be between patients, and he would use his iPhone to connect with us. So this was the evaluation of the effectiveness. And what you see there is that, the Zoom calls, the virtual approach worked quite well. People rated it very highly in its effectiveness. And that FBBS is focus, breath, and body scan. People love the bamboo, but all 4 things that we evaluated were rated as quite effective. So the lessons learned, and this is through the lens of the pillars that was mentioned in the first talk, that paying attention and bringing awareness to the present moment is the fundamental resource for well-being, regardless of how the stroll is presented, whether it's virtual or whether it's face-to-face. The stroll theme of awareness can be repeated throughout the 8-week period, and we seek to take it outside the confines of the garden. Jeanne mentioned this too. It's really important. Again, on Wednesday, one of my participants said that she comes to the stroll for anxiety disorders, but she said, when I come through the doors and look at the lake, it's as though I close the door on my anxiety. So, and we love that, but we want her to be able to take that energy, that spirit outside the walls of the garden. Okay, the pillar of connection. Connections can be crafted whether they're face-to-face or virtual. Some of the things we've done is we now have a mentor, someone who's been in the program in the past, and she meets with people to walk them through the garden as they like. On Sunday, she has 4 people she's taking through the garden. It's another face-to-face way, but a smaller group and quite socially distanced. Sometimes our participants have asked if they could exchange emails. We make that happen when they all agree to do that. We limit our virtual meetings to 12 participants so that we don't get a full screen and we really can't see anyone. Connection. Insight. Natural environments foster reflection, which fosters insight. The stroll is not exercise or a task completion. It's about being rather than doing. We have found that personal adaptation of the stroll can foster reflection. And Jeanne mentioned someone who actually did weavings. We have many people who do photography. This week, someone showed me drawings she had done. She showed the whole group drawings she had done while she was strolling. And one of the things that we really hold to is we have professionals who facilitate, and they set the pattern for insight when working with the groups. So I have a PhD in nursing, and the other facilitator has a master's in social work. So they're healthcare providers who have had experience with patients, with people who have suffered loss. Insight and purpose. And for purpose, I've gone to Viktor Frankl, who I know you know, but the last of human freedoms. is to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. We found that if people set an intention, and they can do that sometimes by writing it in their journal, they often share it in the group. That's how we start the first session. It makes a difference if they establish a purpose to begin with, and then to journal in a way that makes sense to them. Some people write haiku, photographs. Sometimes people write stories. So that's the basis of what I wanted to share with you today. And I want to thank you for listening, and so many people who make this stroll come alive, including our wonderful participants, but special recognition to Dr. Ruth McCaffrey, who I think some of you know, who originated the stroll almost 20 years ago and created the book we used with her husband, Bill, and with Claire Hansen. Thank you very much.